The breach. The first warning came not as a bang, but as a whisper, a barely perceptible fluctuation in the quantum field monitors at the Heisenberg Advanced Research Facility. Dr. Eleanor Wright dismissed it as equipment error, something she'd investigate after finishing her coffee. That dismissal would haunt her for the rest of her life. Eleanor's specialty was quantum entanglement, specifically the theoretical possibility of using quantum states to bridge vast distances instantaneously. Her team had been working on the Q-bridge experiment for 3 years, burning through government funding with little to show beyond complex equations and promising simulations. Until today. Dr. Wright, you need to see this, called Marcus Chen, her lead research assistant. His voice held an edge Eleanor had never heard before, a mixture of awe and terror that sent a cold shiver down her spine. The monitoring station displayed readings that defied explanation. The quantum particles they'd been manipulating were exhibiting behaviors that violated every principle of physics Eleanor had ever studied. "That's impossible," she whispered, her coffee forgotten as she stared at the rapidly evolving data patterns. "The entanglement ratio is exceeding unity." "That's theoretically impossible, yes," Marcus finished. "But it's happening." The facility's alarm systems activated simultaneously, their piercing wail cutting through the stunned silence. Above the experimental chamber, reality itself seemed to waver, like heat rising from summer asphalt, but with geometric patterns that hurt the eyes if observed too directly. "Emergency shutdown," Eleanor shouted, her fingers flying across the control panel. "Cut power to the quantum accelerators." Nothing happened. The machines continued to hum, drawing power from somewhere beyond their control systems. The wavering in the air intensified, colors that had no place in the visible spectrum bleeding into existence. "It's not responding," Marcus said, panic evident in his voice. "Something's overriding the safety protocols." The security team burst into the lab, led by Commander James Rivera. "We need to evacuate immediately," he ordered. "Whatever you've done, it's affecting the entire facility." "We can't leave," Eleanor protested, "if we don't contain this." Her words died as the air above the chamber tore open. There was no other way to describe it. A vertical rent in reality itself, edges pulsing with that same eye-watering geometrical patterning. Through the tear, Eleanor glimpsed something. Not darkness, not light, but complex mathematical structures that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human minds were meant to perceive. And then it emerged. The being, if such a word could apply, pushed through the dimensional tear like a birth in reverse. Its form defied description, constantly shifting between states that shouldn't be possible, angles that couldn't exist in three-dimensional space folding in on themselves. Those who looked directly at it reported different things. A crystalline structure that branched in impossible directions, a fluid mass of mathematical equations given form, a being composed of pure information. Security personnel who stared too long collapsed, blood trickling from their eyes and ears. Only Eleanor, whose mind had spent years wrapped around quantum impossibilities, could look at the entity without immediately succumbing. Even so, her brain throbbed with migraine-like pain as it struggled to process what her eyes were seeing. "Everyone out," Rivera ordered, dragging unconscious staff members toward the exit. "Dr. Wright, that includes you." But Eleanor couldn't move. The entity's attention had fixed on her. And in that moment, information flooded her consciousness. Not words, not images, but pure conceptual understanding downloaded directly into her mind. She screamed, the influx of alien knowledge threatening to overwhelm her. When she regained consciousness hours later in the facility's medical wing, Eleanor found herself surrounded by grim-faced military personnel and her own terrified research team. "It's trying to communicate," she said before anyone could speak. "It's a refugee." General Diane Carter, head of the Special Sciences Division, leaned forward. "A refugee from what exactly?" Eleanor's hands trembled as she tried to organize the chaotic information now residing in her mind. "There's something coming. Something that devours dimensions like we consume food. The entity, It calls itself a cognizant, flood here because its own dimensional plane was being consumed. And it brought this threat to our doorstep? Rivera asked, his hand resting not so subtly on his sidearm. No, Eleanor said. The threat was already coming. Our experiments with quantum entanglement created a beacon. We've been broadcasting our location across the dimensional spectrum for months without realizing it. The room fell silent as the implications sunk in. How long do we have? Carter finally asked. Eleanor closed her eyes, accessing the information the cognizant had shared. 3 days, maybe 4, before the first incursion. The Devourers. That's as close as I can translate what they're called. They send scouts first. Then they begin the consumption process. And what exactly does this consumption process entail? Rivera demanded. They don't just destroy matter. Eleanor explained, her voice barely above a whisper. They consume the fundamental laws of physics themselves. Gravity, electromagnetism, the strong and weak nuclear forces. They break them down and absorb them. Everything we understand about reality simply stops working. General Carter's expression hardened. Conventional weapons. Useless. You can't shoot something that exists partially outside our dimensional plane. Nuclear. Might buy us time, but ultimately just provides them with more energy to consume. Carter exchanged glances with Rivera. Then what do you suggest, Doctor? Eleanor took a deep breath. The cognizant shared something else. Knowledge of dimensional barriers. With its help, I believe we can create a shield around Earth, hiding us from the Devourers. And we should trust this thing. Rivera asked skeptically. We don't have a choice, Eleanor replied. But there's a problem. The technology requires materials we don't have and manufacturing processes beyond our current capabilities. How convenient, Rivera muttered. There is one possibility, Eleanor continued. The cognizant can manipulate matter at the quantum level. With proper guidance and resources, it might be able to create what we need. You want us to give an alien entity access to our advanced laboratories? Carter asked incredulously. I want us to survive, Eleanor countered. And right now, the cognizant is the only one who knows how to make that happen. The debate raged for hours, but with satellite observatories already detecting strange gravitational anomalies at the edge of the solar system, Carter eventually authorized Eleanor's plan under extreme security measures. The cognizant was transported to a secondary research facility buried deep underground. There, surrounded by armed guards and the world's brightest scientific minds, it began working with Eleanor to construct a dimensional barrier generator. Progress was hampered by communication difficulties. The cognizant's natural form of expression involved multidimensional mathematics that human minds struggle to comprehend. Only Eleanor, with her partial download of alien knowledge, could maintain consistent communication, and even she found the process mentally exhausting. Then there was the question of trust. Rivera and his security team remained convinced that the cognizant had ulterior motives, possibly even being in league with the Devourers as an advance scout. We're setting ourselves up, Rivera argued during one particularly heated meeting. Giving it access to our technology, our understanding of physics. If it wanted to harm us, it could have done so already, Eleanor countered. Its own dimension was consumed. It's fighting for survival just like we are. The situation changed dramatically on the third day. Astronomers reported a massive distortion forming near Jupiter, a tear in space-time visible, even through conventional telescopes. The outer planet's orbits began to destabilize as fundamental gravitational constants fluctuated. They're here, Eleanor announced grimly as she studied the readings. Sooner than we expected. The cognizant reacted with what Eleanor interpreted as panic, its form fluctuating rapidly between states as it attempted to accelerate their work. The prototype barrier generator was only half completed, its power systems untested. Then, unexpectedly, a second-dimensional tear formed within the facility itself. Unlike the controlled tear that had brought the cognizant, this one pulsed with malevolent energy. Through it emerged what could only be described as a devourer scout. Where the cognizant was a being of complex, mathematically perfect patterns, the devourer was anti-pattern, a void that negated reality itself. Those who looked upon it didn't collapse. They simply ceased to exist, converted into energy that the scout absorbed. In the chaos that followed, as security personnel were erased from existence and scientists fled in terror, Eleanor made a desperate decision. While Rivera organized a fighting retreat, she and the cognizant rushed to activate the incomplete barrier generator. "It won't shield the planet," she explained to General Carter over the emergency channel. "But it might create a localized bubble that will hide this facility." "Do it," Carter ordered. "We're deploying nuclear options as a last resort." The cognizant worked frantically, its form blurring as it manipulated quantum states faster than human eyes could follow. Eleanor's contribution was more limited but equally vital, her human perspective providing an anchor point that kept the alien technology compatible with Earth's physical laws. As the Devourer scout breached the final security door, Eleanor activated the generator. A shimmering field of multidimensional energy expanded outward, enveloping the facility. The scout paused, its void-like presence seeming to search for prey that had suddenly vanished from its perception. Inside the shield, Eleanor watched with bated breath. The generator strained, power fluctuations threatening to collapse the protective bubble at any moment. But it held. "It worked," she whispered to the cognizant. "But it's just this facility. How do we scale this to protect the entire planet?" The cognizant's response came as a burst of mathematical concepts that slowly resolved into understanding in Eleanor's mind. It wasn't about size or power, it was about complexity. The shield worked because it incorporated both the cognizant's multidimensional mathematics and Eleanor's human perspective, creating something unique that the Devourers couldn't perceive. What they needed wasn't more power. They needed more perspectives. "General," Eleanor said, a plan forming in her mind. "I need you to find me every neurodivergent physicist, mathematician, and theoretical engineer you can. People who see patterns differently, savants, those with synesthesia, anyone whose brain processes reality in unique ways." "Why?" Carter asked. "Because," Eleanor replied, watching as the Devourer scout finally retreated through its tier, "humanity's greatest weapon isn't our technology or our weapons, it's our diversity of thought." The convergence. Within 24 hours, the underground facility had transformed. Where military personnel and conventional scientists had once dominated, now a diverse collection of unique minds filled the laboratories and workspaces. Mathematicians with synesthesia who perceived equations as colors and sounds. Autistic physicists who could hold complex multidimensional models in their minds. Savants who could perform calculations that would take supercomputers hours to solve. Eleanor moved among them, coordinating their efforts while the cognizant provided the foundational alien mathematics necessary for the dimensional barrier. General Carter had pulled every string, calling in favors from research institutions and private companies worldwide to assemble this unprecedented team. "I still don't understand how this is supposed to work," Rivera admitted, watching the chaotic but oddly synchronized activity around them. Though still suspicious of the cognizant, recent events had softened his stance somewhat. "The Devourers perceive reality through dimensional patterns," Eleanor explained. "They detect worlds by their consistent mathematical signatures. Earth, like most habitable planets, has a very recognizable pattern, a beacon in dimensional space. And we're trying to—" "What?" "Camouflage the planet." Eleanor nodded. "Exactly. But not with one pattern. With thousands. Each person here perceives and processes reality differently. By incorporating those diverse perspectives into the barrier matrix, we create something too complex for the Devourers to recognize." Outside their protected bubble, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The Scouts' report had drawn more Devourers to the solar system. Saturn's rings had been completely consumed, the fundamental forces that held them together absorbed. Mars showed signs of gravitational collapse as the laws of physics began to fail around it. World governments had been informed of the threat. though public panic was being managed through cover stories about unusual solar activity. Military forces worldwide stood ready, despite Eleanor's insistence that conventional weapons would be useless. Inside the facility, progress was uneven but promising. The integration of human cognitive diversity with alien mathematics created unexpected breakthroughs. A teenage mathematical prodigy discovered how to reduce the power requirements by an order of magnitude. A physicist with synesthesia found a way to maintain barrier stability by harmonizing the dimensional frequencies, a concept she expressed through musical notation that only the cognizant fully understood. Eleanor worked to the point of exhaustion, serving as the bridge between the cognizant and the human team. The alien knowledge in her mind was gradually becoming more integrated, less painful to access, but it took a toll. She suffered frequent nosebleeds and migraines as her brain rewired itself to accommodate concepts it was never designed to hold. 7 days into the project, with Earth's moon showing the first signs of dimensional instability, they were ready for the first full-scale test. "The generator network is online," reported Dr. Asha Patil, the quantum systems engineer who had redesigned the power distribution system. "But we're still looking at coverage for only about 30% of the planet's surface. It's not enough," Eleanor said, studying the projection models. "The devourers will simply consume the unshielded portions first, then work their way around." The cognizant, who had been quietly observing from a specially designed containment field that helped stabilize its form, suddenly pulsed with activity. It communicated directly to Eleanor, bypassing the translation interfaces they'd developed. Eleanor gasped as the information flooded her mind. "It has an idea," she announced to the team. "Instead of trying to shield the entire planet at once, we create a cascading network of localized barriers, each incorporating a different subset of cognitive patterns. Like a patchwork quilt," suggested one of the mathematicians. "More like a holographic fractal," Eleanor corrected. "Each piece contains elements of the whole, but arranged differently. To the devourers, it would appear as dimensional noise, static that they can't identify as a habitable world." The team worked frantically to implement the new approach, redistributing the generator nodes to create the cascading network. As they prepared for activation, alarm sirens blared throughout the facility. "Multiple dimensional breaches detected," announced the automated warning system. "Perimeter failure imminent." River's security team took up defensive positions, though everyone knew conventional weapons would be useless against what was coming. The cognizant's form flickered with what Eleanor had come to recognize as extreme distress. "We're out of time," she announced. "Activate the network, now." Dr. Patil initiated the startup sequence. Around the world, the hastily deployed generator nodes began powering up, drawing on both conventional energy sources and the quantum fluctuations the cognizant had taught them to harness. Within the facility, the prototype hub glowed with unearthly light as it coordinated the global network. The barrier formed not as a single shield, but as thousands of overlapping bubbles, each incorporating different human cognitive patterns integrated with the cognizant's alien mathematics. Where they overlapped, new patterns emerged. Complexity born from diversity. Through the facility's advanced sensors, they watched as the devourers paused in their consumption of the lunar surface. The void-like entities seemed confused, searching for the dimensional signature that had suddenly become obscured. For a moment, hope surged through the team. Then, without warning, the power grid fluctuated. Several nodes went offline, creating gaps in the coverage pattern. "They're adapting," Eleanor realized with horror, "finding the patterns in our randomness." The cognizant communicated urgently, its form shifting through configurations so rapidly that the containment field struggled to compensate. Eleanor interpreted its message with growing despair. "It says we need more complexity, more cognitive diversity, but we've already incorporated every pattern our team can generate." Rivera, who had been monitoring the defensive perimeter, unexpectedly joined the conversation. "What about everyone?" he asked. "Not just the scientists and mathematicians, everyone." Eleanor stared at him. "What do you mean?" 7 billion human minds, Rivera said. 7 billion different ways of perceiving reality. Can we use that? The cognizant pulsed with what Eleanor sensed was approval, even excitement. It began transmitting complex mathematical formulations directly to her mind, faster than she could consciously process. Yes, she breathed as understanding formed. We don't need to directly wire everyone into the network. We just need to synchronize the barrier frequency with the global electromagnetic field generated by human neural activity. The human thought sphere, Dr. Patil mused. Theoretically detectable, but we've never had instruments sensitive enough to measure it. The cognizant can perceive it, Eleanor said. And more importantly, it can help us attune the barrier to it. They worked feverishly to reconfigure the system, even as reports came in of devourers breaking through the weakened sections of the barrier. Cities in the exposure zones reported gravitational anomalies, compass failures, and in some cases, localized physics breakdowns where the fundamental forces began to unravel. The cognizant, understanding the desperate nature of their situation, did something unexpected. It voluntarily dissolved its containment field, a process that caused it visible distress, and merged partially with the hub generator, its multidimensional form becoming one with the technology they'd created together. What is it doing? Rivera demanded. Becoming the interface, Eleanor explained, tears in her eyes as she felt the cognizant's pain through their mental connection. Its consciousness can serve as the bridge between the barrier technology and the human thought sphere. With the cognizant integrated into the system, the barrier reconfigured itself. Rather than trying to shield the Earth from the outside, it began to work from within, anchoring itself to the collective electromagnetic field generated by billions of human minds, each thinking, dreaming, and perceiving reality in subtly different ways. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The patchwork barrier solidified into something new. Not a shield, but a dimensional lens that refracted Earth's existence across multiple planes, making it appear as something the devourers could not recognize or consume. Through their monitoring systems, they watched as the devourers' consumption of the moon halted. The void-like entities seemed to lose interest, unable to perceive the Earth as a viable source of dimensional energy. Gradually, they began to withdraw, returning through their tears to continue their endless hunt elsewhere in the multiverse. In the days that followed, as the immediate crisis passed, Eleanor worked tirelessly with the international team to stabilize the new dimensional lens. The cognizant, though irreversibly merged with the technology they had created, remained conscious and continued to provide guidance. It sacrificed itself for us, Eleanor told General Carter during their debriefing. A being from another dimension gave everything to save humanity. And it gave us something else, Carter noted, reviewing the preliminary reports. Access to dimensional technology beyond anything we could have developed on our own. The implications were staggering. With the knowledge the cognizant had shared and the dimensional lens now protecting Earth, humanity stood on the threshold of a new era. The possibility of controlled dimensional travel, of exploring realities beyond their own, now lay within reach. But more profound was the realization that humanity's greatest strength, the diversity of minds and perspectives that had once been seen as anomalies or disorders, had proven to be their salvation. The very uniqueness of human consciousness, the countless different ways in which human brains processed and perceived reality, had created a complexity that even the devourers could not unravel. 3 months after the crisis, as Eleanor stood before the United Nations Security Council explaining the new dimensional defense protocols, she found herself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought them here. "We've always searched for unity," she told the assembled world leaders. "Common purpose, common understanding. But it was our differences that saved us. Not just our technology, not just our weapons, but the fundamental diversity of human thought. That is humanity's true shield against the darkness beyond our dimension." As she spoke, Eleanor felt the faint echo of the cognizant's consciousness, now permanently woven into Earth's dimensional lens. Not a warning anymore, but a promise that in the vast, strange multiverse, Humanity had found not just a way to survive, but a way to thrive precisely because of what made each human mind uniquely its own. And somewhere in the dimensional spaces between realities, the Devourers moved on, leaving behind a world they could no longer perceive. A world protected not by force, but by the beautiful complexity of 7 billion different ways of seeing the universe.